All right, we're live on Wownero Talk. Tonight we have a very special guest. It's John Murphy. He, I believe, is the lead developer of Wownero. I have seen Wownero tweeted, and it's often brought up on Reddit. I will be honest, I know little about it, which is why I wanted to do the show. Oh, I should give a shout out to Rotten Wheel, I believe his name is, on Twitter. He had reached out to me requesting that we put this show together. It's at Rotten Wheel on Twitter. He's, I guess, an avid Wownero fan. But I think there is something interesting here. I think if I'm correct, and I'm sure we'll learn about it, Wownero seems to be kind of on the bleeding edge of Monero tech. I don't want to call it a test net, but I believe they're testing a lot of the technologies that we try to implement in Monero. But I'm sure we'll hear the details. So, John, the floor is yours. If you want to introduce yourself and what is Wownero?
Sure. Thanks for having me on, Doug. And yeah, thanks to Rotten Wheel for hounding guys, I guess, until you agreed to bring me on. So Wownero started as basically just kind of a joke. It was the lead up to the fork on Monero, the upgrade about a year ago now, when there was a lot of kind of pre-announcement discussion of this various forks. There was like Monero Original, Monero Classic, which I think ended up being the same thing. And then there was another fork called Monero V. And their whole kind of value proposition was that they were going to... The TV's not working. Sorry. They were going to increase the number of coins by 10 times by essentially just moving the decimal place. Go watch some videos or something, or go read some books. I can't help you. I can't help you right now. I can't help you. Sorry. Mallory, go. There's technical difficulties upstairs that I can't assist with at the moment. So yeah, the Monero V people were like gonna fork off from Monero, a blockchain fork, and when they did that, they were going to take like 7 or 8% of the total supply of coins, and they seemed to be like gaining some momentum, but the whole kind of thing was absurd. And so leading up to that, there was also this Wownero meme that was popular for like 2 days, and the website Local Monero kind of changed their branding to Local Wownero, and it was short-lived.
So it kind of started it was originally kind of making fun of Monero V, is that?
Yes, exactly. Okay. But the difference between Monero V and Wownero was that Wownero launched with its own blockchains because there were some concerns about privacy degradation due to transaction outputs being used with different ring members on the diverging forks.
Right. If you were going to claim your Monero V, there was a risk that you would be kind of revealing, leaking some of the privacy of your own Monero coins. I guess exposing the decoys potentially.
Yeah, and so I'm not a programmer. I wouldn't call myself the lead developer at all. I would say that I'm kind of the creator and maintainer of the project at this point. But I kind of, just as an experiment, kind of as a joke, to see if I could do it, get it off the ground, I forked the Monero code and, figured out how to set up an Explorer and a pool so that everything was ready to go when we launched. And it launched on April 1st, ahead of the fork and ahead of Monero V. We kind of beat the 10x without the pre-mine or the privacy implications. and it was fairly popular. I mean, and there was kind of people that came out of the woodwork who were interested in it. Primarily, I would say the lead developer is probably this guy, Wownero, who is anonymous. Honestly, I have no idea who he is. He's apparently a real person because I think some people met him at DEF CON last year. So he's been around for at least a little while, but he does the majority of the, I mean, it's primarily kind of maintenance code, bringing stuff in from Monero or bringing stuff in from like upstream or forks. And there's a few other folks who have kind of taken an interest in it.
So what is the mission of Wownero? So it's kind of started as this meme coin where they were, I guess, making fun of Monero V and saying, well, if you're going to do it, let's do it the right way. But what is kind of the ultimate mission of Wownero? Is it actually trying to be a real coin? Is it trying to compete in the space, or what's its purpose?
Like, what's that? I don't know that it has a vision, but it exists and it's kind of taken a life of its own. I guess the main mission is to produce memes and coins, meme coins. And it's kind of like the Doge of crypto note at this point, I think. But I don't know that it has a real mission in life. It's like, I mean, it exists and it trades and people mine it, and there's development work that happens on it. But I don't know where it's going in the future.
So am I correct in that it is working on some kind of, tech that, Monero hopes to implement, that it's trying to maybe implement first, like multi-sig things, I think I've heard, and some other, is that?
Yeah, I mean, when it launched using the original Bullet version of Bulletproofs. So kind of like that was implemented on that hard fork coming up. And so it activated from block 0 on Wownero. So we had like the first live net implementation of Bulletproofs, I think, which kind of ended up being a pain in the ass because it was like Monero subsequently, they had only activated it on testnet at that point, and before the actual fork, they ended up changing the implementation. So then I think back in September or October, we had to figure out how to keep the old version for all of the blocks up to that point, and then fork and use Monero's new, more efficient version of Bulletproofs. And yeah, there was a guy, Rene Brunner, R-Brunner7, who developed a, I forget the name of the program that he uses, but yeah, it's a multi-signature communication kind of side channel that he uses over BitMessage. He uses a Python implementation of BitMessage, which is like this old chat email. I think it's essentially like an email program that was started maybe in 2011, and nobody really uses it as far as I know. It's supposed to be like decentralized email where you have to do proof of work to send emails, and there's like a quasi-blockchain that only lasts for 2 or 3 days before things are deleted. So if you want to receive email, you have to kind of be online all the time. And he had developed a, implementation of the Monero wallet that would talk to this BitMessage protocol, and because you actually have to send a bunch of messages back and forth to generate a Monero multi-signature wallet. And so he had developed this way that the messages would be relayed back and forth between the two parties over BitMessage. And he wanted to implement it in Monero. And I think some of the folks there were a bit skeptical. And so we were happy to let him implement it on Wownero. I'm not sure if it ever got merged into the Monero code. I don't use multi-signature wallets.
Okay. So is it
Uh,
successful on Wownero? Is it being used? Is it?
as far as I know, I mean, it was fairly extensively tested, but I don't know that it's being used for. I mean, I'm not sure that the value of all of the coins on the network combined is really worth even putting into a multi-signature wallet. So I think I looked earlier, and I think the market cap of all of the coins is like 150,000 maybe. So
Oh wow.
it's a very, very small market cap coin at this point.
Okay. Is it, where is it? Is it traded on, like, obviously it's got to be traded somewhere for it to have a value. Where is it? Where could it even be
It's
found?
primarily traded on this exchange called TradeOgre, which is like,
sounds very trustworthy.
they've been around for,
Okay.
I guess at least maybe 18 months or 2 years. And they list, I think they started out as kind of, so there's no KYC. You can just sign up with an email address. They don't want any of your documents. And they're primarily focused on smaller crypto node coins, I would say. So there's all kinds of weird stuff on there. And it's traded on a couple other exchanges, but that is the primary one, I think.
So would you say Wownero is the most successful kind of fork coin of Monero versus of these, you know, Monero V, Monero Original, which I don't even know if anything ever happened.
Came out of that kind of 2 or 3 month span. Yes, I think we're definitely successful at this point.
And most so because it really doesn't compete or hurt Monero in any way. It's just kind of a fun project on the side that's using Monero's tech. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, I think so. So yeah, I mean, the other thing that we're interested in implementing possibly is this new proof of algorithm that is being developed by this guy Tevador, primarily, I think now, which is this random. It started as random JavaScript, and now it's random X. So that's something we would definitely be interested in adding. Wownero has also been kind of affected by the same ASICs as Monero has recently, because we're using the same proof of work algorithm. So
you guys have seen your hash rate has spiked up as well?
Yes. Yeah, it's gone like maybe up 2 or 3 times. And it's like, you know, the buddy will jump on and mine a whole bunch of blocks, and then there won't be any blocks for like several hours. So it definitely seems kind of.
When do you guys think you'd be adding that that upgraded proof of work, the random X, or I don't know what it's called now? Yeah, it was random JS, right? I think it's.
Yeah, random X now. I think it's getting close to being kind of production ready. So Wownero is actually about to hard fork in the next couple of days to update its proof of work algorithm, as well as a few other things.
Are you guys like kind of on the same 6-month schedule of trying to upgrade?
Yeah, yeah, we're basically forced to follow Monero pretty much to stay up to date. And we generally fork a month or so ahead of them, just because they kind of finalize things earlier than us. We only need 3 days or 7 days to put stuff out. But yeah, that's definitely one thing that we would be interested in adding and testing out ahead of Monero, because I think it'll probably take them another year before they're ready to activate that on mainnet.
Yeah. And yeah, no, so that sounds like a positive, right? Because now it's kind of a real world test case here. I mean, I don't know how much of a test it is given the amount of people actually using Wownero, but definitely a positive. So are you active in the Monero community as well? Did you come from the Monero community, or are you
yeah, so I
a Wownero maximalist?
No. I'm becoming more and more of a Bitcoin maximalist in my old age, I would say. But yeah, I started mining Monero probably in May of 2014. So I've kind of been around since the beginning. And I wrote, like I said, I'm not a programmer, but I did write some of the very first GUIs. That was like a major issue when Monero started, was everybody had to use this command line interface, and there was much bitching and moan. So I think I actually got like some kind of like bounty for writing one of the first GUIs back in the day. It was like 200 Monero or something, maybe. Back when it was like 80 cents a Monero, you know. So yeah, I've been around for a long time, and I didn't really expect the whole Wownero thing to last. I'm kind of shocked that it's gonna probably see its first birthday here in the next couple of months. One of the other, or I guess two of the other kind of contributions to the wider CryptoNote community that I think Wownero has made have been by this guy DSC, or XMRDSC, who I know who he is in real life, but I don't know if he wants me to tell him who he is in real life. But he's like the primary Monero GUI developer for like the official Monero GUI, and he has contributed the design, and he's mostly operating this forum funding system. So, you know, Monero has this forum funding system where people can propose projects and then raise funds for it. So he developed an open source version of that for Wownero, which I think is at funding.wownero.com. And that has been picked up by at least two other projects, I think. Aeon is one who kind of borrowed his code. And there's another one too, I think. And he's also developed this light wallet, which is maybe at light.wownero.com or lightwallet.wownero.com, but it's a really, I wrote two light wallets, and they were, I mean, it's essentially just a wrapper for the command line wallet. It sends commands and receives stuff, but mine were really terrible, and this one is really awesome. So if you haven't checked out the Wownero light wallet, I don't use it because I don't use any GUI wallets, but I would say it's got to be at least a little bit better than the official Monero GUI wallet, I think.
Okay. So why should people in the Monero community care about Wownero? Should we?
Probably not.
I like the honesty.
I mean, it's just a kind of fun project. I think, you know, especially kind of last year in 2017, everything was like so serious. And even now, I mean, in the whole space, it's like, you know, everybody's worried about when is there going to be an ETF, and our privacy currency is going to get kicked off of regulated exchanges, and like just kind of you know, diversion.
What's your take on the space? So you said you've become maybe more of a Bitcoin maximalist in your older years. How do you look at the whole space? Do you think it's a winner take all space? Do you think there'll be a few coins? Is it about the one that becomes digital cash?
That's a tough question. I think at least for the next 5 or 10 years, there's going to be multiple competing coins. And I don't think, you know, everybody's going to die. I do think there's going to be some consolidation, which there has been over the past year. I think that's going to continue. But I think I think Bitcoin's really cemented its place as money in the space. I think, you know, Ethereum is trying to do something a little bit different there. And I know that Monero kind of likes to pitch itself as, you know, digital cash, or you can't have sound money without privacy or fungibility, right? That's a essential aspect that you know, people in the Monero community like to, you know, advertise. But just, I think it's hard to grow and kind of mature into that role with these, you know, 6-month upgrade schedules where things are being changed, you know, twice a year. It doesn't really sound like a lot, but, you know, for people who are going to try and store significant, you know, sums of value, I think it's a little hard to see how Monero can continue to grow without solidifying at least, you know, a big part of the protocol, so that there's not going to be further change. And, you know, Bitcoin is really the exemplary, you know, nobody changes less than Bitcoin in the whole cryptocurrency space, right? So that's kind of how I came about to the maximalism view.
So you think that's more essential than it becoming perfect money first, right? Because, so I mean, the fact that Bitcoin, well, I mean, the fact that Bitcoin maybe is, you know, like you said, it's more certainly more cemented. There's, you know, there's, I guess, arguments as to why that's certainly beneficial. But you think it's okay that it hasn't adopted fungibility, or that it may not ever be able to?
I think at this point that doesn't seem to be limiting its, you know, dominant position in relation to other cryptocurrencies. I think Ethereum is kind of worse from the fungibility standpoint, and it doesn't, and probably Ripple even worse than both of them. So, I mean, the top three is kind of doesn't seem to be damaging them too much at this point. And I mean, there's ways that you can acquire Bitcoin fairly anonymously, and if you, you know, protect your tracks, I think you can probably maintain a fair high degree of anonymity. I'm not like a privacy freak, so maybe that's why I feel this way. I kind of got into Monero as a miner more than somebody who was very interested in the fungibility aspect of it. I started like mining Dogecoin, and then I kind of moved to Vertcoin, and Fluffy Pony actually invited me to come check out Monero on IRC. And it was like, I had CPUs and GPUs, so it was like the perfect coin when it launched. But, you know, the longer I've been around, I really think for like a large market cap coin where you're kind of the leader in your field, I guess, I think changing the proof of work every 6 months is kind of probably not ideal. Like, I think a year ago, it may have been better to just go to some proof of work algorithm that could have been permanently set and live with ASICs on the network. But that doesn't seem to be the opinion of the majority of Monero users at this point.
So yeah, what is your kind of your logic there? You don't think it's important that the network tries to maintain its decentralized nature and fighting against ASICs until a certain point in time? You think it's just inevitable and it might as well just give up now?
Pretty much, yeah. I mean,
Now, but
so
with
I,
a new random X thing that you guys are, that you get,
so
even
I think that
Wownero is adopting, do you think that's futile and it's not going to serve its purpose?
I think it's more important for probably like micro or small cap coins, um, where you're trying to, mitigate, large GPU farms or nice hash. But I think when you get to the point where there's multiple companies that are developing ASICs for a complex proof of work algorithm, I think that's indicative that the currency is worth enough that, there's going to be investment in the hardware. And I think it's kind of hard to say that Monero mining is more or less decentralized. I would say it's more centralized than Bitcoin at this point, from a couple standpoints. One is that at this moment in time, there's probably one or two entities that are 75, 80% of the network hash rate. And so just from the standpoint of like changing the proof of work, that's kind of inherently centralized, right? That the new proof of work is chosen and tested by a group of like 5 or 10 people. So I, to be honest, hadn't really watched the show before I got invited on. I'm sorry. But I watched, somebody recommended the Open Bazaar episode, and I made it about halfway through that. And then I clicked through it to your playlist, and I saw that you had interviewed Andrew Polstra. And I watched that whole episode, and I mean, he's a wizard, and I didn't understand a lot of the things he was talking about, but he wrote a paper on proof of work that I probably came across in, I don't know, 2016 or so, 2015, 2016. And I think he makes some compelling arguments about why ASICs are inevitable and it's pointless to try and avoid them. And I mean, I think I recommend everyone to look at Andrew's paper, but just beyond everything he says in the paper, I mean, it's just such a mind, trap. I mean, it sucks so much energy. There's people focused within the community, who are interested in Monero, just solely on, every 6 months you have to develop a new proof of work, and it's got to be tested, and you have to it's just a huge production, and then it also causes these huge emotional Reddit flame threads where people are fighting about GPUs versus CPUs versus ASICs, and takes a lot of energy to fight about beyond what's in his paper on why everyone should use ASICs.
Yeah, I mean, I think the idea is that it is, I guess, eventually inevitable, perhaps, but we're just not ready to. The community isn't ready to accept it yet, with the hope of waiting to open the floodgates once, you think it would be a more fair battleground, so that it, you could let a more decentralized network blossom as opposed to letting ASICs take over at an early stage. I think is the logic there.
I mean, it's not so early anymore. It's 5 years old, and even a year ago, there was 2 manufacturers making ASICs for Crypto Night, which is fairly complicated algorithm. I think if they had a forked at that point to just A3, which is like a simple compute algorithm that's designed to be implemented in hardware, I would imagine at this point, there would be at least 2, probably more ASIC architectures. I mean, this is a hashing algorithm that was, I think it won the competition in 2013, but there's like public designs for ASICs.
Yeah, but can some kid in Venezuela go purchase one at a store and plug it in and start printing money in his house.
As far as I know, from what I read on like our cryptocurrencies, like all kinds of Bitcoin miners in Venezuela. So I mean, if somebody's selling SHA-256 ASICs down there, I don't see why it would be impossible to get SHA-3 ASICs there.
Yeah, I don't know if that's the case. My understanding was these ASICs are very hard to get your hands on, and when you do, by the time you do, they're kind of already used up and useless and have already been used by the insiders, as opposed to CPUs where it is a competitive landscape, and it makes it more purely opt-in, permissionless, where anyone anywhere with an internet connection and some electricity can become a part of the network and start participating.
Yeah,
I mean that's the
romantic ideal.
It's the romantic ideal, and I think it's worth fighting for, and I think that's a lot of what Monero does, right? So it's kind of fighting to be the ideal crypto and sticking to those ideals. Like the other thing you talked about, obviously the fungibility, right? So saying that cash should be fungible, whereas Bitcoin I wouldn't say has given up on that effort, but they've kind of argued that maybe it's not as important, something they'll figure out later, or maybe they never do figure it out, and that's okay because Bitcoin is good enough and it has the network effect. Whereas Monero is like, no, these are the things that we need it to be, and that's what we should be working on. That's my take on the Monero versus Bitcoin.
Yeah, I mean, I just feel like at some point you have to stop chasing perfection and live with what you are. Otherwise, you can't really grow. I mean, it's ultimately about being decentralized money, and
yeah, but it is growing, right? I mean, it's if you look at it's useful as digital cash today, right? So I mean, if you had to go use digital cash to, I don't know, donate to WikiLeaks or buy something on some dark market somewhere, you can use Monero today, and you probably should use Monero as opposed to one of the others if that's and then that's really the only current use case for this stuff, right? So it's living up to that.
Yeah.
Because what else are we using it for? I mean, I guess store of value.
Right. I mean, that's Bitcoin's whole thing, right?
Right.
I guess, I mean, Monero is a little bit different, but I just think to keep growing, it necessarily implies that the network's going to keep becoming more valuable. The coins are going to become more valuable. And I don't know. I mean, I just think, the coins are for the most part out in the market now. There's the tail emission, which is 1 or a couple % inflation the first year, but I think it's up to like 92% mined at this point. So it's at this ahead of Bitcoin in terms of its primary emission curve. So I think the fairness argument is a little maybe not as important as people make it out to be in terms of being able to collect rewards.
Right, because so much of the coin is already out there.
Yeah.
How about that the emission, the tail emission? So in Wownero, it's capped, correct?
Oh, right.
So
yes, that was the other thing that Monero V pitched as like true hard money, is that they were going to cap the emission at no tail emission. So they moved the decimal and said no tail emission. So that's Wownero also has no tail emission, but I set the emission curve so that it's much slower than Monero's. So we're almost up to a year now. Only like 10% of the coins are mined. I don't think the last coin would be mined until 2070 something or 2080 something. So I'll probably be dead.
So there's that debate right now in Bitcoin, and obviously it's one of the things crypto was designed to do, which is that the tail emission that allows for the coin to continue to be secured forever, right? That incentive to mine always remains. Do you have an opinion on that? I mean, there's even been talks recently about perhaps one day Bitcoin may have to add a tail emission of some sort.
I do think that is one thing that Monero has right and Bitcoin has wrong. It's hard to say. I mean, maybe it'll work out for Bitcoin even if they don't fork. But yeah, it's something that makes sense. I mean, the amount of inflation that it comes with decreases over time, and it's minimal to begin with. And I think, I mean, just looking at, you know, what happened with full blocks last year in terms of the fee market, and it's like it comes and it goes. And there's I think numerous publications about kind of analyzing what miners would do in the absence of a block reward, and how in some cases, you know, there's no real incentive for them to not orphan the block before them, kind of take the transactions from that block to get more of a reward for themselves. So I think that's, and I mean, Bitcoin, I've seen, you know, besides just adding a tail emission, they have ideas about, I think, you know, adjusting the difficulty based on the number of transactions that are included in the block, which I haven't read into that or anything too much, but I think it's more of an immediate problem for Bitcoin than people realize, because, you know, you think about Bitcoin being, you know, the coins don't run out until 2142 or something. But with the halving every 4 years, you know, it gets down, I guess in 6 months, it's going to go to 6 coins. So then in, you know, 8 years, 12 years, the block reward for Bitcoin will be less than a Bitcoin.
Right. While at the same time, transactions are moving to second layers like Lightning Network.
That's the idea. Yeah. But I mean,
no, but I mean,
right.
it's losing the incentive to mine, right? If all transactions are happening on the second layer.
Right. Yeah. So I definitely think that's something that Monero does better than Bitcoin. Based on I'm not an expert. Like, this is not my primary life, like a lot of people that you interview, I imagine.
It's all right. We do all types of shows here, as long as it's Monero focused, or we somehow tie Monero into it. Do you have any opinion on, so that this, you know, this meme that goes around about, you know, or it's kind of a fact that you can't be both perfectly binding and perfectly blinding. So Monero, for example, is perfectly blinding, but it's sacrificing its ability to be auditable, and you don't know if there's some kind of secret inflation bug that's happening. Whereas in Bitcoin, it's kind of the opposite. So you're secure in knowing that it can't be secretly inflated, but you're sacrificing the blinding aspect. So it's not you know, it doesn't have confidential transactions.
Yeah. Like I said, I'm not a huge privacy nerd, but I would say that the whole recent debacle with Zcash was certainly a clusterfuck. Yeah. Have this hidden bug that they announced 11 months afterwards, and they, you know, cross their heart, hope to die that nobody exploited it, but you can't really tell. And they're migrating over to this new network, and hopefully there's no extra coins that come across when they do that, but it's still kind of to be determined. So I think that's like the extreme bad case, right? And personally, I was never interested in Zcash, really, just because I was not a fan of the whole 20% of the block rewards go to Zuko and Roger Ver and whoever else invested in the electric coin company. But I think Monero uses, I think, a bit more well-developed technology. However, I mean, there was a bug with the bulletproof implementations, I think on testnet only, that was caught before it was, you know, put into production. That could have allowed for coins to be created out of thin air, basically. So I mean, I think that kind of goes to the, you know, stability of Bitcoin, right? That if you're constantly changing things, especially if you're constantly changing things with, you know, the possibility to introduce these kind of bugs, that's something that makes Bitcoin maybe more attractive to certain people.
Yeah, no, I think that's definitely an argument. I mean, I guess the hope is Monero will start to solidify as well once the base structure is in there. Do you have any opinion on ring signatures and whether or not that technology is good enough? Or, I mean, there's always talk in Monero land and how that's something we would like to improve upon, perhaps maybe eventually replace with something else. Is Wownero on the bleeding edge of swapping out ring signatures for something else?
Yeah, I mean, it's like the pros and cons, right? I mean, the ring signatures, you know, with a enforced mix-in of 11 or whatever Monero is using now, and stealth addresses and confidential transactions is, you know, probably good enough privacy, pretty good privacy maybe. And yeah, I mean, I've heard talk of, you know, in the future, maybe, you know, food want to switch over to ZK Starks or whatever, you know, where you have better, larger, you know, anonymity set for transactions and stuff. But I mean, that's kind of the question. Like, is it better to keep pushing the envelope? And how long is it, you know, how far do you go before you just keep going for and have a group of people who are in charge of managing that? Or at some point you start to kind of leave things alone and make it extremely difficult to do anything so that people can have time to build more confidence in the system, you know, broadly speaking.
Yeah, I feel like, you know, in Bitcoin, it just happened. It was a natural occurrence, right? It wasn't, I don't think, so much people unanimously agreeing that Bitcoin shouldn't be changed. It's just there were just so many. It just became so large that it became difficult to get the consensus to change. It's kind of just a matter of growing pains and kind of reaching that maturity level where it becomes inevitable that it's no longer easy to pivot and change because the consensus just is no longer there. Do you think that's kind of a fair way of looking at it?
I mean, it was definitely a interesting battle, I guess, from 2015 to 2017, and still kind of ongoing over the whole SegWit versus SegWit 2x and Bitcoin XT and unlimited and all of that stuff.
Right, with a lot at stake.
Yeah, I mean, and I think that kind of, you know, ultimately, I think there was a bit of a, you know, I mean, they forced this user activated soft fork out to activate SegWit, and that was kind of the tipping point to get it done. And then I think in the future, I mean, I don't know how many more times they can do that and get everybody on board. You know, I think there's a couple more technologies that Bitcoin would like to implement, like the Schnorr signatures and stuff that Holstra was talking about. And I think, you know, maybe they have one or two more chance to push through. But yeah, I think that's kind of in my opinion, probably a net positive for Bitcoin that it's so difficult to get things done.
Do you see any new coins coming out of this Monero upgrade, or there's not a?
I read about one called Monero Rings or something, but
Oh, really? Okay. And what's the
I don't
strategy
know.
there or the purpose there?
To make money for the people who started. Probably.
Okay, fair enough.
I don't think they have it. I think it's just, they want to keep, it may have, probably may have been put forth by the people who are, mining on dedicated hardware at this point. I think that was
Right.
the case a year ago as well, right?
Yeah. I mean, it does seem like as Monero, Monero is obviously getting larger, but it does seem like Monero does have that advantage that it kind of is good at keeping keeping the message in its community on point, so that it kind of brings in this consensus, right? So everybody in the Monero, I mean, I can't speak for everybody, but there's this theme of let's strive to be digital cash. So people are okay with doing what it takes to maintain a distributed mining network. They are okay with doing what it takes to make sure the coin remains fungible and private, and then they kind of weigh the choices against those policies. And it seems to be doing a good job at being cohesive in that everybody kind of is like, okay, well, this check that box of making sure we remain digital cash.
Yeah, I think I would largely agree that the kind of technological upgrades are largely supported. I don't think I've ever seen anybody complain about, the addition of confidential transactions or bulletproofs, but there was quite a bit, I think, of argument over the addition of the tail emission back in 2015 or whenever that happened. That's still technological, but I don't see the kind of kumbaya community spirit with this whole proof of work discussion that's been happening over the last few weeks. I would say it seems like the majority of people are in favor of this random X CPU algorithm, which I don't think it would be bad for Monero to adopt it. The one thing I don't really like about it is that it's really relatively difficult to verify the blockchain using a shitty computer. Like if you have 4 GB of RAM or less, then it becomes pretty slow. I think on the order of 100 milliseconds per block. So, in a couple of years when there's 1 million of these blocks, that can be a significant time. But there definitely seems to be kind of 3 camps forming. There's been a very vocal crowd of GPU miners who are anti-random X because I think it basically is not currently mineable by GPUs. And then I think the majority are for X CPUs. And then I think there's at least some contingent of people who are in favor of having some kind of easily asyncable algorithm. So it'll be interesting to see where that goes in the future. The other thing I think about, like, even if Monero went to random X, for instance, 3 or 4 years down the line, I don't think that CPU architecture is going to, maybe CPUs or GPUs or other kinds of custom computing devices, I think that's going to change more significantly in the next 5 years, probably than it has in the last 10 or 15. We're kind of hitting the limit, on scaling the pitch of transistors. And so there's a lot of work being done on putting memory close to the compute cores of CPUs and other. I mean, there's more custom architectures that are being developed for doing, machine learning and identification and stuff. So I think optimizing a proof of work for the hardware that exists today is not going to be something that lasts more than a few years into the future.
And you're saying that's a reason not to implement RandomX?
Yeah, I think it's a reason to just go to a easily acyclable algorithm and say we're going to stick with this forever unless it's proven to be cryptographically broken. Which, if it's good enough for the NSA, I mean, it's probably good enough for Monero, right?
Well, I'm sure the NSA started Monero, so or at least
I think
Wownero.
yeah.
All right. Well, I think this was a good chat. I appreciate your perspective on things. It's always nice hearing different people's stories. I will keep my eye on Wownero.
Yeah, definitely check out the Light Wallet by DSC. It's easily the most aesthetically awesome cryptocurrency wallet on the internet today, I think.
That is very interesting. I will check that out. Monero could always use development in those areas of UX. So
yeah,
maybe that's something we could steal from Wownero. And thanks.
I mean, he's the lead GUI developer for Monero, so maybe in the next version or two, you guys will get some.
Okay, so it could
awesome.
be coming our way.
Yeah. Okay.
Thanks again for coming on. I appreciate it. Thanks for taking the time.
Yeah, it's great talking to you. Thanks for having me on. I'll look forward to checking out some of your future shows.
Thank you. Talk to you soon.
All right. Bye.